Hello everyone, today I'm going to introduce a surrogate-based optimization using random forest. Surrogate-based optimization makes use of surrogate modeling techniques that approximates a more complex, higher-order model to quickly find the local or global optima. And there are different surrogate modeling techniques, including the Mars model, artificial neural networks, Gaussian process, support vector machine, a lot more, and the random forest. And in this study, we focus on the random forest. Random forest is a combination of decision trees that can be modeled to map the relationship between input and output data. And random forest models consist of a large number of individual uncorrelated decision trees as an ensemble and generate their predictions using the expected value of individual decision tree predictions. And for regression, the final predictions for X can be made by averaging the predictions from all the individual regression trees on X. Random forest decision tree structure allows for it to be formulated as a mixed integer linear program. And in this talk, our objective is to propose frameworks with different dual and primal bounding approaches to solve MILP of random forest, such as we use Lagrangian decomposition, Benders decomposition, progressive hedging, alternating direction method of multipliers, and diagonal quadratic approximation. We also compared proposed frameworks based on 282 test functions. Each random forest model is composed of several trees with a series of decision nodes. The decision node consists of a parent node with a left child node and a right child node. If the indicated input value is less than or equal to a threshold value in parent node, then the left child node is selected, and otherwise the right child node is selected. Decisions are made at each branch in a tree until reach a final leaf node. And this decision branch can be represented by a disjunctive structure and with big M reformulation yield a mixed integer linear program. The objective is to minimize the output of the random forest model, which is the average value of the final leaf node selected by the model. And the model determines the optimal input value X, which determines the minimum objective value. And we have the binary variable y, which equal to 1 if leaf node L of tree T is selected, and 0 otherwise. And for the continuous decision variable xi, which represents the input to the random forest model with dimension I, and parameters hp represent the threshold value for parent node P. We can solve MILP of random forest in existing commercial solver. And here we apply the MILP of random forest to solve the perm function d beta, and we find the solution time grows exponentially with increasing number of trees. And for random forest models with a large number of decision trees, we find the corresponding MILPs generally require a significant computational effort to solve to optimality. If we look at the original big M formulation for the MILP of random forest model, we can see it contains a complicated variable xi, and we can introduce an additional continuous variable zit with additional constraint 6. And this MILP can be reformulated to contain complicated constraint. And we can apply the Lagrangian relaxation and remove this complicated constraint and dualize to the objective function, and then we can make the formulation separable. And this Lagrangian relaxation can be fully decomposed to each individual tree subproblems, and we can solve each individual subproblems and address the computational complexities. And here is a general scheme of the Lagrangian decomposition on the MILP of the random forest. And we first initialize multiplier and scales and solve decomposed Lagrangian problem and obtain dual bound. And then we generate primal bound using heuristic and using the solution obtained from dual bound and as an input to our trained random forest model. And then we terminate if the relative gap is below the certain tolerance or the iterations exceeds our maximum iteration numbers. And then we have two different ways to one using the subgradient method to update the multipliers and other using the cutting plane method, which solved optimization model with previous solution as cutting plane. Except for Lagrangian terms, We can also add penalty nonlinear regulation terms with penalty factor rho, which further enforce the convergence of the equalities. And we have different approaches to address these nonlinear terms, such as a progressive hedging, alternating direction method of multipliers, diagonal quadratic approximation. And for other approaches, such as a Bender's decomposition, which address complicated variables in the original Big M formulation, and we can also solve each individual tree problems individually, like the sample average approximation. And for these penalty nonlinear terms, it is very important to update the penalty factor. We first talk about the Bender's decomposition, which addresses complicated variables in the original Big M formulation of random forest. The MLP of random forest can be decomposed into the master problem that determines the common decision variable x and the subproblem that generate leaf node selection variable y with fixed x from master problem. And we can formulate the subproblems as its dual form and solve dual problem and generate Bender's card iteratively in the master problems. And the dual and master problem is solved until convergence criteria are met iteratively. Next, we will talk about the progressive hedging. The progressive hedging was proposed as a decomposition technique to separate the nonlinear terms, shown in the previous equation. At the initial iteration, the variable z is initialized by solving the decomposable subproblems of original problem without enforcing constraint. And besides the first iteration, the z, I, t, k at kth iterations are generated solving the decomposed subproblems without common decision variable xi. And the common decision variable xi is taken as average value of zit from each individual tree subproblems. The Lagrangian multipliers are also updated using penalty factor rho and difference between x and z. The solution x and z are used to generate the best primal bounds. And the dual bounds in this framework are obtained by solving the Lagrangian decomposition model with calculated multipliers. At every iteration, the penalty factor rho is updated, and if the solution have not converged sufficiently and the maximum wall time is not exceeded, it will go to the 5-step. And next, we use the diagonal quadratic approximation to make the nonlinear term separable. And different from the progressive hedging, which is using the average power to make the convergence and make the nonlinear term separable. The diagonal quadratic approximation using the reference point and using Taylor series expansion to approximate the nonlinear term, and using a linear loop to make the reference point converge. And we also apply heuristic to generate additional primal bounds and update the Lagrangian multipliers and obtain our dual bound from Lagrangian decomposition. The third approach we use to address this nonlinear term is the alternating direction method of multipliers, which is called ADMM. The ADMM uses partial updates and jointly solves two subproblems containing only variables x or variables z in either subproblem. Both progressive hedging-based and ADM-based utilize Lagrangian decomposition to generate their dual bounds with fixed Lagrangian multipliers calculated based on the weight rho. And they are similar in ways of obtaining heuristic primal bounds and requiring the updating the penalty terms. Next, I will show the three different strategies we propose to update the penalty factors. We propose three different penalty factor updating schemes. The pitch 1 uses average leaf node value to calculate the rho, while the pitch 2 directly uses 1 in numerator, and pitch 3 a heuristic space search strategy, where the rho is given sufficient small at initial iteration and double by every 2 iterations. All above approaches, such as progressive hedging, ADMM, DQA, Lagrangian decomposition, and Bender's decomposition, are implemented in Python and PyOmo. And here we apply above approaches to holder function 2D to compare their generated primal bounds. As shown in these figures, all of them were able to obtain the optimum or near optimal primal bounds within 100 iterations. We choose Lagrangian decomposition, progressive hedging, and ADMM, and construct different frameworks with different updating schemes. We have two different multiplayer updating schemes, the subgradient method and cutting plane method, and we also apply the dynamic and golden ratio, two different updating schemes to update the scale. The group strategies are also applied to address and reduce the impact of each individual trace error, and as a result, we finally have total 20 different frameworks. We apply 20 different frameworks to test functions from 5 different categories with different function shapes from bowl-shaped mainly local minimum, plate-shaped, valley-shaped, and other functions. And total 282 test functions are smooth continuous functions. And all approaches are implemented in PyOmo and Python and solved in Auburn University Hooper cluster. The maximum iterations are 100. For the results, the figure shows the percentage of total cases versus the gap from optimum from primal bounds generated by 20 different frameworks. And within 100 iterations, the computational experiments revealed that the proposed frameworks were able to obtain primal bounds with less than 1% gap from the optimal for nearly 60% of the test functions. And among 20 different frameworks, the ADLD3 group and the PHLD3 group has the best performance. And this figure shows the percentage of total cases versus a gap from the dual optimal for dual bounds generated by 20 different frameworks. And we can clearly see the differentiation between the frameworks with group strategies and without group strategies, which the group strategies help to frameworks obtain the tighter dual bounds. And for the relative gaps, within 100 iterations, the computational experiments revealed that the proposed frameworks were able to obtain the less than 1% relative gaps for nearly 16% of the test functions. And ADLD3 group and PHLD3 group obtained the best relative gaps over all the different frameworks. And here come to the conclusion and future directions. And we have proposed 20 different frameworks for solving the MILP of random forest. And the proposed frameworks are tested with 282 test functions. And grouping strategies were able to reduce optimality gaps up to 67% of the original gaps. And within 100 iterations, the ADL3 group obtained the tightest gap. And the computational experiments revealed that proposed frameworks were able to obtain less than 1% of the optimal for 56% cases and within that 1% relative gaps for over 15% cases. And in the future direction, we plan to apply solution approaches on noisy data or to data that has discrete inputs and or outputs, and also apply these solution approaches to gray box optimization. And here I want to acknowledge the funding source from Rapid and Auburn University Hooper cluster. And thank you. I'm really happy to answer any questions.